Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel. I am your host, Baron Imperius. For today's project, we will be building a series of columns for use in tabletop games. I have previously built columns for use as scatter terrain in my own D&D game. They are excellent for use as obstacles or cover during combat, and when used with dungeon tiles can make basic structures, such as ruins or monolithic standing stones. They can also help designate creatures that are flying or hovering. They are also relatively simple to build, so this is a great opportunity to expand my own collection and show you how to make your own. You'll need to gather the following materials: XPS foam and foam board, thin cardstock, cardboard or wooden sheets for the base, PVA glue, acrylic paints in the shades of black, medium gray, pale gray, and white, pre-made dirty wash, short nails or screws, and for basing materials, you're going to need sand, dirt, or other fine particulate. You also need the following tools: a crafting knife, hobby knife, and or a box cutter, texturing tools such as aluminum foil or rocks, an emery board or fine grit sandpaper, paintbrushes, and water for cleaning said paintbrushes. Once you have everything you need, you can start by cutting out the columns from the XPS foam. For the dimensions, the base of the column will be 1 inch by 1 inch, and I will be cutting out 4 to a height of 2 inches and 3 to a height of 4. My original plan was to have 4 of the 4-inch columns, but I ran out of material and decided to go with something a little different. For cutting out the columns, a hot wire cutter or a very sharp box cutter would be best. However, I don't have a hot wire cutter, and I seem to have misplaced my box cutter. In situations such as this, I have to use my sharpest hobby knife and make multiple cuts, trying to keep each cut as smooth as possible. Despite my best efforts, the sides always seem to turn out a little too rough for my liking. To fix this, I simply shave off the larger deviations and sand down the sides a little. I could continue to keep shaving and sanding down all of the sides of the columns until it's perfectly smooth and even. However, I find that some of the rougher patches on the columns that resist my efforts to smooth them out can also be treated as happy little accidents that help with the ruined appearance I'm going for. Once all of the columns are cut out and the sides are mostly smooth, I shave off the vertical corners of each column. I only take off about 1/8 of an inch from each corner and sand down the cut a little to make sure it's smooth and mostly even. I like to score my columns at the halfway point, using something like a pencil or a pen. It's my attempt to make the column look like it was built from multiple stones stacked on top of each other rather than one long piece. I then smooth out the line with an emery board, trying to make it look like a straight cut. Once all of the columns are cut and have been shaped to my liking, I break out my texturing tools. Rocks. You can also use a crumpled ball of aluminum foil, but over repeated use they will become smooth and lose their texture. Sometimes I tap the rock, sometimes I roll the rock, but all the while being sure to apply an even but firm pressure. Once I am satisfied with the texturing on the column, I go back and smooth out some of the areas I want to look like masons had been at work, such as where the column stones have been stacked. I also take my hobby knife and make divots in the stone, places where the column was later damaged by some accident or battle in the past. I like to make a shallow cut and then flick the knife to tear out an uneven cut. I think this suggests more of a mix of brute force and decay as the stone crumbles around the wound. A sharply angled cut might suggest a powerful monster or a supernaturally sharp blade, such as if there had been a battle with an ancient dragon or your typical anime protagonist. Now to make the plinths and capitals of the columns. I take some sheet foam and cut out pairs of squares. While the shafts of columns started out with 1 inch by 1 inch bases, after shaving, sanding, and texturing, they are now a little smaller. However, I do want to make sure that the capitals and plinths do have a bit of overhang from the column shaft, so when cutting them out from sheet foam, I cut the squares to about 1 1/16 by 1 1/16 inch. Once I have all of the squares, I proceed to shave off the corners, apply textures to the side, lightly smooth the edges with an emery board, and make some divots in a handful of them. With the capitals and plinths ready to go, I can attach them to the columns. For the plinths, I glue them onto the base of the column, but also want to add some weight to help with stability. I create a little guide hole with a needle, and then drive a small hobby nail through the plinth and into the column. You could do the same thing with a small screw or even tiny fishing weights to give the base some weight to prevent it from toppling over during a game. The capital is simply glued to the top of the column and then can be textured with a stone while it's in place. If you are concerned about the capital coming off, you can further secure it in place by using a toothpick as a dowel. You can then later cover up the hole created by the dowel with some basing material or perhaps a lightweight spackle. When the glue on the columns has had enough time to begin to set, I can glue the columns to their bases. For the bases, I'm going to be using pre-cut wooden discs that I purchased from Michaels. If I recall, the brand is called Woodsies, and each one of these discs is about 1 3/8 inch wide. You could also cut your own bases from a thick cardstock or a thin cardboard. Having your columns resting on a wider base adds additional stability and also conveniently covers up the nail head in the plinth of the column. So I did mention something special when discussing how many columns I intended to build. Well, when measuring out the portions for the 4-inch tall columns, I realized I had only cut a length of foam that had enough material for 3 columns, with a small piece left over that wasn't even enough to make another 2-inch column, so I decided to go with something else. I decided to make the remains of a ruined column, only the jagged remains of the plinth and the bottom of the shaft with some broken rubble nearby. I proceed mostly the same as with the other columns, except I use my hobby knife to break off some sizable chunks from the top, but save those for later. When assembling the entire thing, I glue the base of the column onto a pre-cut wooden sheet shaped like a teardrop, gluing the broken column to the wider portion. I then take those pieces I cut off prior, run them through my texture shaker, as seen from my previous video, link above, and glue what pieces I can to form a pile of rubble. With the columns finally assembled, I can move on to basing them. In this case, I want to keep it simple and consistent with the theme of ruined structures, so I want the base to look like a stone floor covered with gravel and debris. First, I put down a layer of glue on any exposed portions of the wooden base. Then I quickly apply my basing material, a mixture of coarse sand and powdery silt. I keep both in separate bottles, but collect the material that doesn't stick in a tray for use on later projects. In this case, I'm using the leftovers from previous builds. Once applied, I give the base a couple of good taps to shake off any excess into one of the trays. Once all of the columns have their basing material applied, I just wait until the glue dries.
Sometime later.
With the glue dry at last, I can begin to paint. When painting stone a gray color consistent with most of my previous builds, I start with a black base coat. I will add additional coats as necessary to make sure there is even coverage.
Sometime even later.
Now that the base coats are dry, I can dry brush. The first layer is a medium gray, followed by a layer of pale gray, and the last layer is titanium white. The overall goal is to have a buildup of color from shadows to highlights, and to emphasize the textures I've added. I have thought of experimenting with colors and textures to create other kinds of stone. Let me know if you're interested by leaving a comment down below. Once I'm finished with dry brushing, I apply the dirty wash to the columns. I have to be sure to get an even coverage, that I don't miss any spots, and that I don't allow it to pool too heavily in places. Once the wash is dry, time to apply the acrylic sealant. Make sure to do it in a well-ventilated place. Overall, I consider this project to be a resounding success. I'm very happy with how they turned out in the end, and I look forward to using them in future games. More importantly, I want to know what you think. Do you feel inspired to build your own terrain or dioramas or other crafting? Did you learn something, find the video useful or at least entertaining? Do you have any suggestions for future video ideas? Go ahead and do all the things down below. Like, comment, and subscribe. I have been your host, Baron Imperius. Thank you for watching, and I hope you're inspired to build your fantasy.